the worst and most horrifying operation in the history of Israel. That's how one Israeli journalist described the Lavon Affair. But what could be so bad that it earned such a harsh condemnation? And why have so few people heard about it? Well, that's exactly what we're here to uncover. This isn't just a story of a failed spy mission. It's a tale of political backstabbing, international intrigue, and consequences that echo through history to this very day. Ready to unravel one of the 20th century's most explosive secrets? July 2nd, 1954. A seemingly ordinary day in Cairo takes a sudden explosive turn. A post office in Alexandria erupts in flames, sending shockwaves through the bustling city. But this was no accident. It was the opening salvo of a covert Israeli operation that would change the course of Middle Eastern history. Operation Susanna, as it was codenamed, was a daring and desperate gambit by Israeli intelligence. Their goal: to sabotage Egypt's relationship with the United States and the United Kingdom. The plan was audacious: create chaos, pin the blame on local opposition groups, and make Egypt look unstable and unworthy of Western support. Now you might be wondering, why would Israel want to drive a wedge between Egypt and the West? Well, it all came down to the Suez Canal. Egypt was in talks to nationalize this crucial waterway, and Israel feared losing access. By making Egypt appear unstable, they hoped to derail these negotiations and keep the canal under British control. But here's where it gets really interesting. Instead of sending in their own agents, Israeli intelligence made a controversial decision. They recruited Egyptian Jews to carry out the attacks. These weren't seasoned spies or hardened operatives. They were ordinary people, shopkeepers, students, and housewives, suddenly thrust into a world of espionage and sabotage. The recruitment process was intense and secretive. Israeli agents posed as Egyptian nationalists, approaching members of the Jewish community with promises of fighting British imperialism. Those who agreed underwent rigorous training in Israel, learning the craft of spycraft and sabotage. The network took shape under the guidance of Avri Elad, an Israeli intelligence officer posing as a German ex-Nazi named Paul Frank. He set up a base of operations in Alexandria, coordinating a cell of about a dozen agents. Their mission? Plant bombs at American and British targets across Egypt, including cinemas, libraries, and educational centers. As the operation unfolded, tension mounted. The agents carried out several small bombings, but suspicion was growing. Egyptian security forces were on high alert, and the network was feeling the heat. It was a powder keg waiting to explode. And explode it did. On July 23rd, Israeli spy Philip Nathanson entered a post office in Alexandria, his pockets laden with incendiary devices. But as he prepared to plant the bomb, disaster struck. The device ignited prematurely, filling his pocket with flames. Nathanson was immediately arrested, setting off a chain reaction that would unravel the entire operation. Egyptian authorities, now aware of the plot, began closing in on the rest of the network. One by one, the agents were rounded up, their carefully constructed covers blown to pieces. The fallout was immediate and severe. The captured agents faced intense interrogation and the prospect of harsh punishment. Israel's carefully laid plans lay in ruins, and the international community was about to get a front-row seat to one of the most embarrassing episodes in Israeli intelligence history. As the dust settled on Operation Susanna's spectacular failure, all eyes turned to a mysterious figure known as Avraham Seidenberg. Initially hailed as a hero, his story would soon take a shocking turn. What role did this enigmatic escape artist play in the operation's downfall? And why did his actions continue to haunt Israeli intelligence for years to come? With the capture of Philip Nathanson, Egyptian authorities began closing in on the rest of the Israeli spy network. The carefully constructed covers of the agents started to crumble under intense scrutiny. One by one, they were rounded up, their secret world of espionage exposed to the harsh light of day. The interrogations that followed were brutal. Egyptian security forces, known for their harsh treatment of political prisoners, didn't hold back. The captured agents faced physical beatings and psychological torture. It wasn't just about extracting information. The Egyptian government saw an opportunity to make a statement, to show the world they could stand up to foreign interference. But amidst the chaos, one man managed to slip through the cracks. Avraham Seidenberg, also known as Avri Elad, vanished like smoke. His escape was initially celebrated in Israel. Here was a hero, the only member of the operation to evade capture. But as time passed, questions began to surface. How did he manage to escape when all others were caught? Was there more to his story than met the eye? Meanwhile, the captured agents began to crack under pressure. Confessions started pouring out, each one more damaging than the last. The full extent of Operation Susanna was laid bare. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents. It was a coordinated campaign of sabotage aimed at destabilizing Egypt and souring its relations with the West. The Egyptian government wasted no time in capitalizing on this intelligence goldmine. They organized a show trial, parading the captured spies before the world. It was a public relations coup for Egypt and a nightmare for Israel. The international community watched in shock as the details of the operation were revealed. But the story didn't end there. Remember Seidenberg, our escape artist? Well, his tale took an unexpected turn. After his daring escape, he was sent on another mission to Germany. But suspicions about his loyalty began to grow. Was he really the hero everyone thought he was? Or was there something more sinister at play? The consequences of the failed operation were immediate and far-reaching. 2 of the captured agents were executed, sending shockwaves through Israel. The rest faced long prison sentences. But the impact went far beyond the fate of these individuals. The Lavon Affair, as it came to be known, set off a chain reaction that would reshape Middle Eastern politics for decades to come. While the captured agents faced their fate in Egypt, another battle was unfolding in the halls of Israeli government. Was there a traitor in their midst? The finger-pointing that followed would tear apart alliances and rewrite the political landscape of Israel for years to come. The Israeli government was in chaos. Operation Susanna's failure had exposed a gaping wound in the nation's leadership, and now everyone was scrambling to avoid the blame. At the center of this political maelstrom stood Defense Minister Pinhas Lavon, a man whose career was about to be consumed by the very operation he may or may not have authorized. Here's how it went down. Prime Minister Moshe Sharet, trying to get a handle on the situation, appointed an unofficial commission to investigate the whole mess. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, that's when things got really interesting. The commission started hearing testimonies from key figures, including a rising star named Shimon Peres. Yeah, that Shimon Peres. Now, you'd think a government inquiry would clear things up, but it just made everything murkier. Lavon denied any knowledge of the operation, claiming a senior army officer had acted without his consent. But guess what? That officer had a different story. He insisted Lavon had given the green light. It was a classic he said situation, but with international consequences. The commission's conclusion. Inconclusive. They couldn't definitively say whether Lavon had authorized the operation or not. this wasn't just a bureaucratic hiccup. It was political dynamite. The lack of a clear answer left the door wide open for more accusations, more finger-pointing, and more backstabbing. Lavon, feeling the heat, tried to go on the offensive. He moved to dismiss Shimon Peres and the officer who had accused him. But Sharet, perhaps sensing the political winds shifting, blocked the move. It was a power play that backfired spectacularly. Lavon, his authority undermined and his position untenable, had no choice but to resign in February 1958. But wait, there's more. Lavon's resignation wasn't just about one man losing his job. It was a seismic shift in Israeli politics. The old guard was being pushed aside, and a new generation of leaders was stepping into the spotlight. Who was waiting in the wings to take over the Ministry of Defense? None other than David Ben-Gurion, the country's first prime minister and a towering figure in Israeli politics. The Lavon Affair didn't just reshuffle the cabinet. It cracked open deep fissures within the ruling Mapai party. On one side, you had Lavon and his supporters feeling betrayed and pushed out. On the other, Ben-Gurion and the younger generation, including Peres and Moshe Dayan, consolidating their power. The party that had led Israel since its founding was now at war with itself. And here's where it gets really intriguing. Later findings suggested that Lavon might have been framed. But Ben-Gurion, now back in a position of power, refused to publicly exonerate him. Why? Was he protecting the military establishment? Or was this a calculated move to keep his political enemies down? Either way, it added fuel to a fire that would burn for years to come. The flames of controversy in Israel were nothing compared to the inferno brewing in Egypt. Nasser, the man who'd caught Israeli spies red-handed, wasn't about to let this slide. His next move? It's not what you'd expect. Nasser's response to the Lavon Affair was swift and fierce. He used the incident to paint Israel as a dangerous aggressor, stoking the fires of Egyptian nationalism. In public speeches, he denounced the Israeli operation as a direct threat to Egypt's sovereignty. This wasn't just political posturing. Nasser saw an opportunity to consolidate his power and position Egypt as a leader in the Arab world. But Nasser didn't stop at words. He took action that would have far-reaching consequences. In the wake of the affair, cross-border violence between Egypt and Israel escalated dramatically. Palestinian raids from Gaza into Israel increased, with Egyptian support. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were part of a broader strategy to keep Israel off balance and assert Egyptian dominance. Israel, still reeling from the political fallout of the Lavon Affair, responded with force. On February 28, 1955, they launched a military raid on Gaza. The target? Egyptian military installations. The result? 39 Egyptian soldiers dead. This wasn't just retaliation for the Palestinian raids. It was also payback for the execution of 2 Egyptian Jews involved in Operation Susanna. Now think about this for a second. We've got 2 nations, both feeling threatened, both convinced they're in the right. It's a recipe for disaster. And that's exactly what happened. The Gaza raid marked a significant escalation in hostilities. It was a clear message from Israel. We won't sit back and take it. But here's where things get really interesting. Nasser, feeling the pressure from Israeli aggression and lacking support from Western powers, made a decision that would change the balance of power in the Middle East. He turned to the Soviet Union for military assistance. That's right. The Cold War was coming to the Middle East, and the Lavon Affair helped pave the way. The Soviet Union was more than happy to oblige. They saw an opportunity to gain influence in a strategically important region. Soon, Soviet weapons were flowing into Egypt. Tanks, planes, artillery. Nasser was building up his arsenal, and he wasn't shy about letting Israel know it. This shift in alliances had profound implications. The United States and Britain, who had been trying to keep the Soviets out of the Middle East, now found themselves in a tricky position. Their ally, Israel, had provoked Egypt into the arms of their Cold War rival. The geopolitical chessboard was being reshuffled, and all because of a botched espionage operation. The Lavon Affair and its aftermath fundamentally altered the relationship between Egypt and Israel. Any hope of peaceful coexistence went up in smoke. Instead, both nations were now locked in a cycle of suspicion, retaliation, and escalation. The stage was being set for larger conflicts to come, with Israel and Egypt locked in a dangerous dance the world's superpowers couldn't resist joining in. But here's the kicker. Their involvement didn't calm things down. Instead, it set the stage for a crisis that would bring the world to the brink of war. How did a regional conflict become a global powder keg? The United States and the United Kingdom, long-standing allies of Israel, found themselves in a precarious position. The Lavon Affair had exposed Israel's covert operations in Egypt, and the subsequent Gaza raid only escalated tensions. Western powers were caught between supporting their ally and maintaining stability in the region. They tried to play both sides, offering diplomatic support to Israel while attempting to placate Egypt. But Nasser wasn't buying it. Feeling betrayed by the West and threatened by Israel, Nasser made a bold move that would change the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. He turned to the Soviet Union for support. This wasn't just a diplomatic shift. It was a full-blown realignment of alliances. The Cold War, which had largely been confined to Europe and Asia, was now making its way into the heart of the Middle East. The Soviets, eager to gain a foothold in this strategically crucial region, were more than happy to oblige. They saw an opportunity to challenge Western influence and expand their own sphere of control. What followed was a deal that would send shockwaves through Western capitals: the Czech arms deal. In September 1955, Egypt announced a massive arms purchase from Czechoslovakia, a Soviet satellite state. This wasn't just a few rifles and some ammunition. We're talking about a game-changing arsenal: MiG fighter jets, tanks, and heavy artillery. Overnight, the balance of power in the region shifted dramatically. Israel, which had long enjoyed military superiority over its Arab neighbors, now faced a formidable adversary armed with cutting-edge Soviet weaponry. The United States and Britain were caught off guard. They had underestimated Nasser's willingness to break from traditional alliances. In response, they tried to lure Egypt back into their sphere of influence with a carrot: funding for the Aswan High Dam project. This massive infrastructure project was Nasser's dream, a way to control the Nile's flooding and generate electricity for Egypt's growing population. Initially, the U.S. offered $68 million in direct aid, with the World Bank chipping in another $200 million. It seemed like a generous offer, a way to mend fences and counter Soviet influence. But there was a catch. The funding came with strings attached, conditions that would limit Egypt's ability to seek aid from other sources, including the Soviet Union. Nasser, emboldened by his new Soviet alliance, wasn't about to be pushed around. He began playing the superpowers against each other, trying to extract the best deal possible. This high-stakes diplomatic poker game infuriated U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles. In July 1956, Dulles made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He withdrew the offer to fund the Aswan Dam. This wasn't just a diplomatic snub. It was a slap in the face to Nasser and a serious blow to Egypt's economic plans. Nasser needed a way to fund the dam project and assert Egypt's independence on the world stage. His response would shock the world and set the stage for a major international crisis. As Nasser searched for a way to fund his ambitious dam project, he stumbled upon a solution that would change the course of history. Little did he know, his decision would trigger a cascade of events, leading to a clandestine military plot involving 3 unlikely allies. How did a financial setback morph into an international powder keg? On July 26, 1956, Nasser dropped a bombshell that shook the world. In a fiery speech, he announced the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company. This wasn't just a business decision. It was a declaration of independence, a middle finger to the Western powers that had long controlled Egypt's economic lifeline. Nasser promised to use the canal's revenues to fund the Aswan Dam project, effectively turning a diplomatic snub into a source of national pride. The reaction from Britain and France was swift and furious. They saw the nationalization as a direct threat to their interests and prestige. But here's where things get really interesting. Instead of going through diplomatic channels, they decided to take matters into their own hands. And who did they turn to for help? None other than their supposed enemy, Israel. In a series of secret meetings, representatives from Britain, France, and Israel hatched a plan that would make any conspiracy theorist drool. The idea was simple, but audacious. Israel would invade Egypt, providing Britain and France with a pretext to intervene as peacekeepers. Their real goal: to seize control of the Suez Canal and topple Nasser's regime. On October 29, 1956, the plan was set in motion. Israeli forces stormed across the Sinai Peninsula, catching the Egyptians off guard. As planned, Britain and France issued an ultimatum to both sides, demanding they withdraw from the canal zone. When Egypt refused, Anglo-French forces launched airstrikes against Egyptian airfields. Now you might be thinking, wait, what about the United States? Well, that's where things get even more complicated. President Eisenhower was furious. He hadn't been informed of the plan and saw it as a reckless adventure that could push Egypt further into the Soviet camp. In a rare moment of Cold War cooperation, the US and the Soviet Union found themselves on the same side, demanding an immediate ceasefire. The military operations themselves were a mixed bag. The Israeli army, led by the future war hero Moshe Dayan, made rapid progress across the Sinai. British and French forces successfully captured Port Said at the canal's northern entrance. But politically, the invasion was a disaster. World opinion turned against the aggressors, and the United Nations moved quickly to condemn the action. As the crisis escalated, the Soviet Union raised the stakes dramatically. They threatened to intervene militarily on Egypt's behalf, even hinting at the use of nuclear weapons. It was a bluff, but a terrifyingly effective one. Faced with the prospect of a wider war, and under intense pressure from the US, Britain and France were forced to accept a ceasefire on November 6th. The aftermath of the Suez Crisis was a seismic shift in global politics. Britain and France were humiliated, their status as world powers severely diminished. The United States emerged as the dominant Western power in the Middle East, while the Soviet Union gained new influence in the region. And Israel? Well, they may have won on the battlefield, but they found themselves increasingly isolated diplomatically. Israel's diplomatic isolation after Suez proved short-lived. A secret deal with France was about to change everything. What if I told you that a failed operation led to one of the most powerful arsenals in the Middle East? The story of Israel's nuclear program is a tale of espionage, deception, and global consequences that continue to shape our world today. In the wake of the Suez Crisis, Israel found itself in a precarious position. Diplomatically isolated and facing an increasingly hostile neighborhood, the young nation was in desperate need of a game changer. Enter France, a country still stinging from its own Suez humiliation and looking for new allies in the region. The French government approached Israel with an offer that would alter the balance of power in the Middle East: help with developing nuclear technology. This wasn't just about building power plants. Both nations understood the real implications of this cooperation. Israel saw an opportunity to create the ultimate deterrent against its Arab neighbors, while France saw a chance to maintain influence in a region where its power was waning. The result? A top-secret project to construct a nuclear reactor in the Negev desert. The Dimona reactor, as it came to be known, was a masterclass in clandestine construction. Built under the guise of a textile plant, the facility was shielded from prying eyes by layers of secrecy and misdirection. Israeli officials went to great lengths to conceal the true nature of the project, even going so far as to build a fake textile factory above the underground reactor. But you can't keep something this big secret forever. By 1958, U.S. intelligence agencies had caught wind of the project. U-2 spy plane flights over the area revealed suspicious activity, and soon the CIA was clamoring for answers. Israel's response? A classic case of nuclear ambiguity. They neither confirmed nor denied the existence of a nuclear program, instead insisting that Dimona was a research facility for peaceful purposes. This policy of ambiguity would become Israel's long-term strategy. It allowed them to develop nuclear capabilities without facing direct international sanctions or pressure. Think about it. How do you punish a country for having something they won't admit to having? It's a diplomatic tightrope walk that Israel has maintained for decades. The U.S., caught between supporting its ally and preventing nuclear proliferation, tried to get a closer look. They demanded inspections of the Dimona facility. What followed was a cat-and-mouse game that would make any spy novelist jealous. Israeli officials would lead American inspectors through carefully choreographed tours, hiding any evidence of weapons development behind false walls and hidden doors. As the 1960s progressed, it became an open secret that Israel had joined the nuclear club. The country that had faced extermination just 2 decades earlier now possessed the ultimate insurance policy. But this newfound power came with a price. Israel's nuclear program strained its relationship with the U.S., particularly during the Kennedy administration, which strongly opposed nuclear proliferation. Just when Israel thought it had secured its place on the world stage, the ghosts of the past came knocking. A long-buried scandal was about to resurface, bringing with it a web of lies, forged documents, and high-level cover-ups. How could one botched operation from years ago still have the power to bring down Israel's political elite? The year was 1960, and a military trial was about to blow the lid off the Lavon Affair. An army officer, accused of leaking classified information, dropped a bombshell in court. He claimed that senior officers had forged documents to implicate Pinhas Lavon in the failed Egyptian operation. Not only that, but he alleged they had committed perjury during the earlier inquiries. This wasn't just another court case. It was a match thrown into a powder keg of political tensions. The Israeli government, caught off guard by these allegations, scrambled to respond. They established the Olshan Dori Commission to investigate the claims. But here's the kicker. After months of digging, the commission came up empty-handed. They couldn't find enough evidence to definitively say whether Lavon had authorized the operation or not. It was a non-conclusion that satisfied no one and only fueled more speculation. Now, you'd think this inconclusive result would put the matter to rest. But in Israeli politics, nothing's ever that simple. A cabinet committee was formed to review the findings, and they came to a surprising conclusion. They cleared Lavon of responsibility for the operation. Case closed, right? Not even close. Enter David Ben-Gurion, Israel's founding father and political heavyweight. He wasn't about to let this exoneration stand. Ben-Gurion refused to accept the cabinet committee's findings, setting off a political firestorm. It wasn't just about Lavon anymore. This was a battle for the soul of Israeli politics. The Mapai party, which had led Israel since its founding, was torn apart by the controversy. On one side, you had Lavon and his supporters, feeling vindicated by the committee's findings. On the other, Ben-Gurion and his faction, including rising stars like Shimon Peres and Moshe Dayan. The old guard versus the new generation. It was a clash of titans that threatened to reshape Israeli politics. But this wasn't just about personalities. The Lavon Affair had become a symbol of a deeper ideological conflict. It pitted the Histadrut, Israel's powerful trade union federation, led by Lavon, against the state-centric approach championed by Ben-Gurion. At stake was the very nature of Israeli democracy. Could the Histadrut's power coexist with democratic governance, or was it time for a change? The political battles raged on, spilling out from party meetings into the public arena. Israelis were glued to their radios and newspapers, following every twist and turn of the scandal. It wasn't just political junkies who cared. This was a national obsession, a soap opera with real-world consequences. As the 1960s wore on, the Lavon Affair refused to fade away. New evidence kept emerging, old alliances kept shifting, and the Israeli public grew increasingly disillusioned with their political leadership. The affair had exposed the cracks in Israel's political system, raising uncomfortable questions about accountability, transparency, and the concentration of power. So, what can we learn from the Lavon Affair? It's a stark reminder that even the most carefully planned covert operations can spiral out of control, with consequences far beyond their initial scope. This botched mission didn't just embarrass Israel. It reshaped Middle Eastern politics for decades. Think about it. One failed operation led to increased tensions, shifted alliances, and even contributed to the Suez Crisis. It's a perfect example of how secret intelligence work can have long-lasting, unpredictable effects on global politics. The Lavon Affair's legacy still echoes today. It reminds us that in the shadowy world of espionage, the line between success and disaster is razor thin. And when that line is crossed, the fallout can change the course of history.